Hello again, everybody.
Ooh.
It's in.
Oh, hello. Welcome to the night shift.
Hello again to James Walshe of Practical Classics magazine.
Hello.
How are you?
All right. Yes. All right. Oh dear, what's my computer doing? Stupid, weird things. Hang on. Oh, there we go. Yeah, good. All right. Night shift and all that. Brand new day. How are you feeling?
Rubbish.
Oh dear. Well, we'll see what we can do. I think all of us are staying up for as late as we can to support you. So
Well, so far, nobody else has been demonetised except number 27.
Okay.
All so right. That's better than last year, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
Actually, no. Last year he wasn't. It was Alex that was.
Okay.
Yeah. Alex is, of course, the person who took Pastor Picasso off me.
Yep.
Alex got rid of Pastor Picasso the other day. And who's got Pastor Picasso now?
That would be me.
Hey!
I don't know quite how that's happened, but I seem to have ended up with a sort of shabby-looking Picasso outside. I haven't even driven it yet. I just haven't had the time, but it's sitting there waiting patiently, and I thought I'd do a bit of research on it just to find out what's going on with it. But this is, of course, to anyone who doesn't know, it's a Citroen Zara Picasso with 514,000 miles on it, or 500 and something, 500,000 miles anyway. It's been a valiant effort to get this thing over 500,000 miles, and it's been done and then some. And it appears to have ended up on my driveway. So I'm going to put some miles on it now and do something with it. Although I did say the other day, I was inquiring as to what its maintenance record was. Noted that it hadn't had a cam belt or water pump change by the looks of it for quite some considerable time, and that is an HDI killer. That's although it doesn't kill it completely dead, I think it just takes out the rockers, doesn't it? But
as you rebuild job. I think the guy who had it who chopped it in at with Ashley at Palmdale, he was maintaining it. Like he was getting it. I mean, a car doesn't last that long by skipping services and things.
No.
And although it looks shabby, I think mechanically it had everything done. But the problem is you don't know when that was last done.
That's the thing, we can't seem to find any record of the cam belt, and it is one of those. But no, it seems all right. I mean, I was quite surprised actually. Drove it around the car park at work, and then brought it home, and then it's been sat there ever since. But it's okay. I mean, there's a bit of clunkiness in the gear change. I think the gear linkage probably needs doing, and a few other bits and pieces, which I can do. But
I mean, they're not amazing gear changes anyway in the Picasso, are they? Not compared. I mean, the Berlingo is a lot better.
The Berlingo is like a Lotus Elise. It's the slickest gear change there is of any car.
It's a Honda S2000, is what it is, isn't it?
A Honda S2000 is like an old Leyland bus in comparison. The Berlingo is a wieldy B-road, monster in comparison. So.
It devours tarmac.
It really does. They do, yeah. They devour washing machines, cement mixers, people, tarmac, you name it. They do the lot. So we don't need to do this, do we? This whole Berlingo thing. How is it that I've had Citroen CXs for 25 years, and for some reason I'm now known as Mr. Berlingo? When the hell did that?
Because you keep buying them.
Well, all right, but
and you keep writing about them. And if you tell everyone in the chat, because I thought this is absolutely fantastic, what happened when Practical Classics magazine said, James, can you stop writing about Citroen so much? What did you buy?
All sorts. I mean, I don't know. What did I buy? I bought a Maxi, which
Did you not buy another version of a Blingo?
Oh yeah, that. Sorry, I'm forgetting. It's been a long day, and I shouldn't be moaning about that. You've had the long day. I haven't.
I'm fresh as a daisy.
Can you buy something that isn't a Citroen? So I bought a Peugeot Partner.
That's brilliant.
Good. It didn't feel as good. It lacked the chevron-y thing.
That just lying on the steering wheel, it just felt wrong, didn't it?
It did. I didn't like looking at it. So in the end, I changed the grille and the steering wheel airbag for a Citroen one, so it felt a bit better. You see, the Peugeot versions of the Berlingo got a boot carpet, so that was one bonus to the whole thing.
I had back in the old days. I had a Peugeot 106 diesel, and we'd already had a Saxo for a long time. Bearing in mind they are the same car. The 106 had. It seemed more insulated. It definitely had better speakers from factory. Carpets were thicker. It's just all the little things on it were just slightly, although it looked older inside, it was just slightly more plush. And I couldn't help but think, like, is that deliberate? Like Citroens, they cheaped out a little bit like Peugeot back in the days to sort of almost make them the budget brand. And then things like the Peugeot gets the carpet in the boot and the Citroen doesn't.
That's the thing, you see. I actually found a carpet, and I go around scrapyards quite a lot, as you do, and I found a lovely Peugeot partner boot carpet, which now lives in my special Berlingo. I have a special Berlingo. I have a
Berlingo for special occasions.
It is the special Berlingo. I have 3 at the moment, only 3. Although, you know, I have had 8. I'm up to 8. You know how this all started? It was all Citroen C5s. This is where this began. In 2017, I bought a Citroen C5, and I quite liked them at the time. Everyone hated them, but I quite liked it. And it was a green estate, slightly more bearable to look at than the saloon version of the C5, and an early one at that, with the sort of gopping face on it. You know, so it wasn't something you'd buy because it was particularly attractive, but it was a brilliant car, and I really liked the way it drove. I liked the way it rode. It rode like a Citroen, and didn't really steer or brake like one because it has conventional steering and brakes. But I quite liked it, and it was cheap. It was £450 for a lot of cars.
They are cheap, yeah.
Birmingham at the time, and the trains were all screwed up. So I thought, well, I'll go and buy a car and get me home, and I bought that C5, and it went for 3 years, no problems. It was a great car. But during that time, I noticed how many were in scrapyards. And back in 2017, we were in a very different situation, I think, in the used car world, weren't we? Where you could still buy a decent car for £500, and you really struggle right now. Certainly since the COVID thingy. So I bought another one, and then I bought another one, and then I bought another one. I had a little fleet of C5s, all of which had either failed their MOT or were imminently going to fail their MOT. In one case, it was from a scrapyard and it was about to be cubed for really silly issues. And the typical one, and the same applies for a lot of Peugeot Citroen cars, and I think probably a lot of other models as well, in that the airbag light was on, and it was a simple case of a wire that lives underneath, a connection underneath the seat, which is for the seatbelt.
Yeah.
What do you call it? The
Pretensioner.
Pretensioners. All you do is get underneath the seat, wiggle the wires a bit, and the airbag light goes off. And that's it. That's all it is. So you reconnect that connector and tidy it up a bit. And so what I did, I ended up doing it in the magazine. So I did this in Practical Classics. I thought, well, there's a social experiment here to be done. So I bought a load more. I kept buying Citroen C5s, and I got up to 10 in the end.
That sounds more like an illness.
Huh?
That sounds more like an illness.
Yeah, I know. It did become a bit of an illness. Certainly, my colleagues were becoming more and more disturbed because they've all got Triumph TR6s and MGBs and all that kind of stuff. And they go, "What are you doing?" And I'm going, "This is a great game." You know, buying these rubbish old cars. And what I was doing was I was putting them back on the road with an MOT, and then selling each and every one of these 9 cars, because I kept one, for exactly what I paid to put them back on the road. So purchase cost £250 plus, you know, whatever it costs to put, you know, maybe a set of tyres or a connector for £3.50 or something. You know, putting these back on the road and then selling them to Citroen Car Club members for exactly what. So I didn't make a penny profit. I could never be accused of being profiteering out of any of them. And all of those 9 cars, bar one, are still on the road, and they're still being used and enjoyed by Citroen Car Club members. The one that failed was a 60,000 miler. The head gasket went, and the owner just sort of binned it, which was really annoying because it was a 60,000 mile car with very little else. But yeah, so I did that, and then ended up sort of kind of falling into the same trap with Berlingos, because again, it's a car that's there's loads of them out there. They're really cheap to run, cheap to fix, and easy to fix as well. but they're being scrapped in their hundreds for no reason, for absolutely no reason other than a chipped windscreen or tires or just whatever. I mean, it just seems crazy to me. We live in this world where we're just throwing away cars needlessly and going out buying. I actually had a Volvo S80 during that time, which was a phenomenal bit of kit, an early S80. It was a D5, great engine, with the 5-speed gearbox. So it did about 1 million miles to the gallon, 1,000 miles to a tank. And I bought it off, weirdly, again, I was stuck somewhere, where was I? Cornwall, and bought it off the comedian Jethro's wife. It was just completely by accident. It was in
What happened was...
Well, I was stuck in St Austell and I needed to get home to Cambridgeshire, so I bought a car, and £350, bought this Volvo. Oh, it's old and knackered, she said. Old and knackered? What do you mean old and knackered? What's knackered? She said, there's a warning light on and it's got a cruise control don't work. Right.
And that constitutes knackered, does it?
Knackered. I mean, it had a few scuffs and dings and scratches over it. Anyway, brought it home, ran it for a couple of years, brilliant car. And then the pandemic struck, and a friend of mine said to me, he was lost his job and was in a bit of a pickle, and they had this £600 a month Jaguar sitting in the driveway. Like, well, why get rid of it, and I'll give you this car. You can have this Volvo. Have it. It's yours. I don't want anything for it. It was £350. It's in good health. It's got airbags everywhere, and it's it's a good car. Anyway, his other half took one look at it and went, "I'm not having that piece of rubbish in the driveway," and that was the end of that. People just want new stuff. They want new shiny stuff. Why? It's utterly pointless. And the funny thing was about that, I think they reached some sort of mileage limit with that car, so they couldn't drive it anywhere anyway without it costing them a fortune. So it became a very expensive garden ornament.
That's a ridiculous situation to be in, isn't it?
That's what people are like. We're idiots because supposedly we're idiots because we like old cars and drive around in just these silly, dangerous, smelly, oily, awful old things. But the joke's not really on us, is it? I don't think it is.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think a lot of it just boils down to the fact that people with modern cars, with the new car, they probably just don't care as much about value for money. They just want ease. They want to look wealthy in front of their neighbours, and they just want something. They get new car. I don't have to worry about it, and that might well be the case a lot of the time, because I suspect that you probably don't get many issues with new cars. But
I don't know.
If you actually sit down and work out what they cost you,
our sister publications would probably reveal some horrible truths about that. So Practical Classics, the offices we share with Car Magazine and Parker's. So we get an interesting little insight into what goes on in that world of new cars. And yeah, of course, new cars are safer, they're faster, they're this and that, and they're probably better made and may last longer than an old car. I don't know, who knows, but certainly reliability though is an interesting one. I occasionally borrow a new car from one of them and drive it around a bit, and what really strikes me is the rather chintzy nature of some of the plastics used. Let's not go into Tesla, but not nice, particularly nice quality. But a lot of cars you'd expect to be really nicely made don't feel half as nice as something built in the 90s or early 2000s. I have to say, that's a really sweet spot, isn't it? That's a sweet spot for the modern car, I think.
My dad bought a DS4 Crossback, and I didn't know much about them. And at the time, I had the early C4 VTS, the coupe.
Oh yeah.
And we went away for the weekend or the week or whatever, and my dad gave us a lift down to the docks because we were on a boat. And I remember sitting in that car thinking, this is worse than the C4, which is like all these years before. It was cramped, it was rattly. It looked, when a car looks horrible to drive, like it just looked like the sound the gear lever was making, and the way he kind of sits and drives. And you're like, that does not look fun. And I remember when he got it, and I said to Alex Scroff, I said, because he obviously knows all about new cars and that. I said, "My dad's bought a new car." "Oh yeah, what is it?" "A DS4." And he went, "Why? Like, why buy one of those?" And then after a while, I said that to my dad. 8 months later, he went, "Why did I buy that? I don't know." He got rid of it. It was like, yeah, it just didn't look. It was just so cramped and like it felt cheap and tacky inside. And you kind of think, "Oh, this is just superficial." Underneath, it's probably the same car. It's just jacked up to make it higher, like an SUV, and
yeah,
it wasn't nice at all. Not compared to me an Alpha GT before that, and that was nicer. It was a nice car, the GT Coupe. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a sweet spot in cars, and I think they're going. Alex bought down a Polestar electric car the other day, and admittedly, it was like nothing I'd been in before. Really, it was so much more modern than anything else I'd been in.
But did you look at the plastics they've used? They're horrible.
Some of them were all right, but like he said, like we talk like ad nauseum about it, but we always do that thing where we say like, "Oh yeah, but feel that," and you scratch the dashboard.
Yeah.
But then he turns around and like makes a very good point. He goes, "Yeah, but who drives down the road doing that?" And you think,
you want pride in your car, though, don't you? Surely, if you're buying what is supposedly a quality product and you're getting plastics that are no better than,
they've got to have a certain percentage that have got to be recycled, haven't they? And they're obviously they're doing their best to save weight.
Yeah.
So you are going to get a lot of cheap plastics and things like that. And he basically made the point that like the heavy traffic areas, they're the bits where the quality goes. The stuff you don't touch very often, quite often find they skimp on it to try and because they've got to get it back somewhere.
Yeah.
And I said that there was a car. He said
Suzuki.
So apparently Suzuki are very, very, very good at making the stuff you touch a lot feel good, like the steering wheel, the heater controls, all the basic things feel great. If you go scratching around at the pillars and all on the roof, it feels horrible. So, and he said that's kind of where you want to be, that sweet spot where you like the bits that you're going to touch, like the door handles. You're always pulling the door handles to make it feel nice, which kind of makes sense to me. But then I know what you mean. There were cars, back in the day where you could sit inside and anything you touched just felt nice.
Yeah, I think there was a sweet spot. Okay, someone's pointed out in the comments there were exemptions. Certain cars from the 90s were not so perhaps, quality driven. But I think there was a really sweet spot as well for repairability as well. Because I was going to mention the C5 on this one because I think it's a really good point, particularly the Berlingo as well. More so, really, because it's so fixable. Everything's there are elements of the C5, as you well know, that are a bit of a pig to get at and awkward. But
to be honest with you, a C5 is an absolute walk in the park compared to a C6. So
there you go.
Quite happy to work on a C5.
My father sold his when he retired. He had a C6, which he adored. And obviously, I think it's fair to say I come from a Citroen family, and the C5 was one of Dad's favourites. But he retired and said, "Well, the first thing that's going to happen is the C6 is going. I've had it. He's had it quite a few years, but." He says, my pension is not going to pay for the repairs that it will inevitably continue to require. And it just, every time it went wrong, it was $1,000.
That's the thing. It's not that they're unreliable cars. I don't think they are. They're really complex. So law of averages, you're probably going to get more issues than you would in something like a Fiesta. But it's not how often they go wrong. It's how hard to fix they are when they go wrong.
Yeah.
It's just a pig.
I'm really pleased. It's kind of, as I mentioned earlier, 25 years of Citroen CXs, and I love the CX. I've had DSs as well, as you know, but I just love the CX. It's been my first love since I was a kid, really, along with the 2CV. But that's another story. But the CX has always been my thing, really, for as I say, over 20 years I've had CXs of all different. But I'm having a break, and it feels so good. One of the reasons, it all started with Liz Truss meddling with the economy last year. That kind of wrecked my mortgage plans, and so I needed to free up some money quite quickly. And I thought, well, I need to sort of reset. I had this GTI Turbo. Don't really like the GTI Turbo particularly.
Oh, it's a pretty car though.
Gorgeous looking thing.
Yeah.
And obviously a legend and all that. But I'm a Series 2 CX guy. I prefer the plastic bumpers.
Oh, really?
In ownership terms, yes. Okay, the earlier ones look a bit prettier, but to own and drive on every day or often, the Series 2 is such an easier car to own, from the way it's put together, the way it comes apart, and you know, it's just such an easy car, much easier car to fix when it
Okay.
when needs work. Um, and it's just better at everything. You know, the door cards don't flap about in the breeze when you open the door and fall off because they're made of papier-mâché and spit. You know, they're just hopeless. So much about those early CXs is utterly hopeless. But owning one, I mean, you know, driving one different. If you don't have to own it and live with it, the later CX was always the better car. But I always preferred the non-GTIs. The complexity of all the wiring and all the extra guff you got on the GTI Turbo spoilt it for me. I mean, they weren't
probably
reliable, but it just made owning them just a little bit more difficult. Everything was just a bit more irritatingly difficult. Whereas the more simple, straightforward Series 2 CXs, the 22 TRS was always my favourite made of it. But even then, every job was just a little bit more difficult, certainly more difficult than the DS. The DS was a much easier car to own than any CX ever was. I just happened to prefer the CX. But I got rid last year of my last CX and the DS. I sold the DS as well. And I tell you what, my life has suddenly become a lot more simple and straightforward as a result.
Should I be selling my, like, all the stuff I got?
Just keep one. I don't know. I just one of the things I wanted to ask you actually, because I never got the chance. When I saw you at the Citroen Car Club rally recently, I wanted a bit of an update on how things were going with your fleet. But and I know you've talked a bit about it today, but I have to say, it has been like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had a Xantia for a bit last year, earlier this year, a Xantia Estate, and that was nice to be back in a hydropneumatic Citroen. Because of course we joke, you know, I love the Berlingo, but look, I'm always going to be a CX or a GSA or an SM.
It doesn't have proper suspension, does it?
No, it doesn't. And you really feel that. I miss hydropneumatic.
They ride well for a conventional car. I think they do ride well.
I think you'll find Jeremy Clarkson said that the Berlingo rode like a Jaguar when he tested it.
Did he?
But it's different. I was going to ask you though. So your hands are very full of very complex Citroen motor cars. Have you thought about maybe just sort of letting one or two go and just so you can concentrate on the one, or is it, you know, I know that these are your dream cars, but
yeah,
where it gets a bit overwhelming, surely.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the Mark 1 BX, the prize-winning Mark 1 BX, that is all but sold anyway. Like, I've got 2-3 people after that. So, I mean, that doesn't really need much doing. It would need, if I was going to keep it, it's an old car, it's going to need something at some point. So I've got that. That will go. It's hard to say, really. I mean, every car's got a point to it. The only one really that with hindsight, I shouldn't have taken on is Clement, is the D Super. Because in hindsight, it was a silly thing to do. That said,
you bought the right one. You've not bought the stupid Palace, which I can't bear. I can't stand all that silly hydraulic gear change nonsense. And you know, you've got the right engine, the right gearbox. It's
the right, yes, right, definitely the right gearbox.
Yeah.
It's a good engine, the 2.2. It's as close as you'll get to a DS without being a DS, if that makes sense.
Fluff and
it's even got a mushroom brake button, you know, it's because it's right-hand drive. So yeah, it wasn't the right thing to do with hindsight. As I said before, you know, people will laugh when I say that I didn't think it was as bad as that, because they'd be like, did you look at it? And they'd be like, yes, but I thought underneath, thing is, it had 25 grand thrown at it underneath. I thought it was going to be somewhat better than that, and it rode really, really well. Like, it goes up and down. Well, it did when it ran really smoothly, and it takes bumps like nothing else I've driven. It's the smoothest thing I've ever driven by far. It's got comfort spheres on it all round as well, so it's like it's just a boat. It's just absolutely wonderful. But and the engine was quite sweet, and the gear change was quite sweet, considering half the bushes were missing out linkages. It stopped well, you know, but it's developed an issue with the well, it was making a noise when you put your foot on the clutch. You were getting a grinding noise. You're like, oh, what's that? Is that release bearing, spigot bearing? Well, it's going to be something in there. Whatever it is, it's a pain. And I was also getting problems where when you went to start it, you get grinding noises off the starter motor. Okay. And that's when I started to think, hang on, is the flywheel moving? Like, is the crank moving? Is it floating? You know what I mean? Like, if I try pushing the clutch down and starting it, if that works, that's not good. But it didn't get as far as I thought. Well, I'll take the starter motor off anyway, have a look at it. And it's just snowballed into this massive project, and the SM is just sat there. But at the same time, so it was an unsensible move. At the same time, if it had gone anywhere else, it would be dead. 100%. Yeah. Apart, without a doubt.
Yeah. I think we all know.
Nobody else would have fixed it.
We all know, and it's the nice thing about your channel and you and a lot of people that I know in the Citroen Car Club, in the classic car world generally. There are people who buy stuff to just have it so they can say they've got one, and it sits there for year upon year gathering mold and rusting. And there are people who buy cars to do something with them, and it doesn't matter how long it takes you. You might be a very elderly man by the time you get to turn the key in your SM and waft off into the sunset. So at least you will have an SM and you'll have done it, and you'll have achieved it. And that's why we love these stupid, daft, smelly, oily, ridiculous old machines, because of how they feel. Well, whether it's a Reliant Robin or a Bentley, it doesn't matter what it is. Yeah. The look of that car is exactly the same. There's no difference. When you go to a car show and you see somebody with a Mini, they love their car in exactly the same way that the guy with the Jensen Interceptor does. There's just no difference with that. And, what you do with it is obviously your business, but how you do it is also, it differs from person to person, and you're definitely one of those people. That's why we watch the channel. That's why we enjoy what you do, because,
someone else is stupid enough to do it.
Low, but hey.
I mean, that was one of the things with the DS was, with that was, I knew it was silly, but the excitement I felt when I went home and thought, I've got a DS.
Yep.
It was just like, and I'm reading the books and I'm throwing myself into the world, and I'm thinking, this has been a long time coming. This is a moment ticked, and it was almost at a point where it was more exciting than the SM, because the SM feels more out of reach, even though it's there. I can see it. It's just sat there going, fix me if you want, but it still feels out of reach. Like I can't afford to repair it, or I couldn't afford to do couldn't buy the parts. Like they're ridiculously expensive to get bits for.
It's another reason I sold mine, because I just thought it's going to need work. The first DS I had actually sounds like it's had a similar issue to yours, in that it was an amazing find, a real catch, because it was locally. It was just a few streets away.
The one that you found, it was in a garage over the road or something.
Yeah, and I mean that's a regret selling that. I feel the pang, that horrible sickly feeling in your stomach where you think, oh, I look at a picture of it and I think that is such a stunning car, because it was the most basic DS you could ever buy. It had nothing, it had no clock, nothing at all. This guy had fallen in love with DSs when he first saw them in '55. He was working in the Navy, and he was on a ship somewhere, and he saw a newspaper, and it had the brand new 1955D, and he's promised himself he'd buy one, and it took him until 1971 to buy the dream car, brand new from a Citroen dealership in Boston, in Lincolnshire. And they said to him, "Well, we haven't got any of the ones you want in stock." well, what have you got? He says, well, we've got these. He says, well, I can't afford them. He says, I want that one. He said, well, it's going to take weeks for it to turn up. Turns out it was one without power steering. It had manual steering. It had lights that did not turn, so fixed headlamps. So even though it had the later headlamps,
fixed,
but they were fixed inside. No clock. They asked him apparently if he want a clock, and he went, no, can't afford it. So it had a blanking plate where the clock should be. And a couple of DS people, proper DS pervs, went bananas for that. They were going, oh, I've never seen a blanking plate before. And they were offering me all sorts of it. So we'll swap you a clock for the blanking plate. Oh, I'm fine, thanks. What a wonderful machine that was. But no matter how much you regret selling something, and I had to sell it at the time, I had the UK's oldest CX turned up, a 1975 CX. And
this is the Delta Blue one?
Yeah, so I had to drag it from a field with some mates, and so I needed the money to put that back on the road, so the D had to go. And it was I watched it drive off and was really sad when it went. However, it went to a really good home, and to someone who almost immediately spent £4,500 on it, because he discovered that the roof rail had rotted out. So the roof had to come off. Funny that, right? I mean,
I know how that looks.
Yeah, absolutely. But I love these. As Pollitt's just commented about barn finds. Don't we just love a barn find? Don't we just love that moment where you go? They rescued a GS, and it was a similar thing. You go somewhere and you drag this thing out, and you hear it fire up for the first time, or with a Citroen, you watch that body rise up on the suspension.
Yeah, I don't think they rescued that GS.
Yeah, all right, okay. They didn't rescue it, but that's actually no. Of course, it was.
Do you remember it?
I do now. Yeah, I've just suddenly remembered. It's the one.
Isn't it the only? There's a certain edition. It's the only one, or something, or.
Yeah, no, there was nothing much left of that, was there? Sadly, but
pretty bad
process, because there's always that hope you might be able to save something. But I recently saved a Smart from a hedge in Scotland, just a 4.2, a really early 4.2, and kind of similar to that one, as Pollitt says. We unearthed it. It was buried in a hedge, and I said to the guy, I said, "What's that doing there?" Oh, he says, I bought that a few years ago and I was going to scrap it. And it worked for about 10 minutes and then it went wrong. Okay, what's wrong with it? The engine seized, he said. Now, when we know something about these cars, I've had a Smart Roadster for 18 years, so I know a little bit about Smarts. And I knew, and I said to him, I said, it's probably the alternator seized, because that's what they do. They're slightly exposed to the water. And, then the thing seizes and then feels like the engine won't turn. Well, it won't turn, obviously, because the alternator's seized. Cut long story short, he came down, he phoned up about 9 months later. I've got this Smart for you. I go, what? I've completely forgotten about it. He says, I dragged it out the hedge, he says, and I put it on the back of a trailer. He says, do you live near Yorkshire? I'm like, no, I don't. I live in Cambridgeshire.
Do I sound like I live near Yorkshire?
Yeah, so where shall I leave it? He says. I was like, I don't know. He couldn't leave it where he was going, so he says, well, I'll dump it by the side of the road and you'll have to come and get it. So I gave him the address of my friend Lynn, who lives in Rotherham, and I said, look, here's the address, can you just roll it off the back of your trailer onto a lawn, and then I'll go and deal with the consequences later. So he did that.
Which he doesn't know it's coming.
Got a very, very angry phone call that evening going, is this yours? I was like, what are you talking about? Is this your car on my fucking lawn? Like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So, fuming. But by then, her kids had named it. They called it Arthur. So why have they called it Arthur? Well, it's just like Arthur Carr.
Yeah, I could see that coming.
Tiny Smart, But do you know what? It was a couple of got it back here eventually, and new alternator. So and the engine started almost immediately. The gear change problem was a brake pedal switch. That's what it was. £11.
Oh, wow.
So £11 plus whatever it was for the alternator, and the engine just drops down on a Smart, so eminently fixable, and job done. Now, how many other cars are there out there like that can be fixed? I mean, it had lived in Scotland its whole life and it did look like it had been in the sea underneath, but there was no actual rust. But it's sad, isn't it, when you see that? And I remember that GS now because it really was properly buried in the earth.
I can't remember the model it was.
No, I can't actually.
Wasn't it orange or something like that? It was.
Yeah.
Had some wacky interior.
I'm sure somebody once said, "Oh yeah, I'll get that back on the road one day."
Yeah, probably. Yeah, from their armchair. I've got a hot take. Would you say, because I've never driven a Smart Roadster, would you say that Smart Roadster is a modern Frog Eye Sprite?
Very much so, yeah. I'm absolutely in with that. There are people who, certainly even Mercedes, when that car was launched in, what was it, 02, it was 2002, it was very rushed into production by Mercedes because it was like a concept car that they just sort of kicked into production because they had lots of people wanting to buy it. And it was a cracking little car, but of course it didn't really live up to expectations because Mercedes were marketing it as or ended up marketing it as more as like a mini Boxster or something. And of course it was nothing of the sort. It was a part bin budget roadster. It should have been a lot cheaper because it was fairly cheaply put together. Quite well engineered. I mean, as I say, I've had mine 18 years and I've had the chance to really properly get under the skin. And it's a very nicely put together, nicely engineered car, but it's built to a cost. You can really tell. Interiors, quite scratchy plastics and not very Mercedes particularly. So it's definitely a parts bin car.
Mind you, that was Mercedes iffy time, wasn't it? That sort of time.
Well, there is evidence of this, actually, Richard, and it is in the wiring. So the wiring is beginning now after 20...
Oh, you've got the biodegradable wiring?
Yeah, and it's really... I went recently to see, we had a little Smart Roadster gathering and in Gloucestershire, and we all got together, and they said to me, have you done your earth at the back? I went, no, should I have done? And this car, basically, this has not been a garage queen. This car is... I used to work in London. I used to drive in and out of London in it years ago. Manchester, I lived in Manchester. I used to go in and out of Manchester city centre, Birmingham city centre, to the offices there. This car has lived with me for the last 18 years as an everyday car. And they said, yeah, what'll happen is that one day it won't start. And it's because the wiring has just fallen apart. You may get the clue, they said, is when you hit the button on the key fob for your boot lid to open and it doesn't work. It's been like
as
that.
You stood there doing this
6 months. It's been like that. So imminently, I've imminent failure with that car. So I'm going to have to pretty much dismantle the rear end of it to get to where all these horrible, nasty, flaky wires go into this earth. So that's a job for those. But it's a brilliant car. I love them, and the values are surprisingly going back up again now and becoming quite collectible. And I tell you what. They're such good fun. I was going to have mine for about 2 years, and I've still got it 18 years later. I just absolutely love that car, and I will be. That's the keeper, I think, along with the 2CV and the Berlingo. Those three are my absolute keepers forever.
And the Berlingo, and the other Berlingo.
Oh, this Berlingo is really important to me. That particular Berlingo is. Where is it?
Here comes the plug.
So this is the one. This is the ex Citroen UK press car. And that there is one Steve Cropley of Autocar. So that's my car there with Steve Cropley.
That's your car?
That's my car. So what happens is...
Oh, I'm thinking of a different Berlingo here.
No. So 2002, right?
I'm thinking of the Poseidon Blue one.
No, that one's gone to a Citroen Car Club member in...
It's gone?
In Carnarvon or somewhere, yeah, somewhere.
Well, the one you were, the camper one?
Yeah, so now I've got this one. This is my sort of... this came along, and I'll tell you why I decided to part with the other one.
I can't keep up with these Berlingos.
So, see this magazine here, Car Magazine?
Yeah, I used to love that.
So this one here is May 1988, and in this particular magazine, I
can't figure out if that's a Fiesta or a Lada Samara update on the front.
That's the Golf. That's the Mark III Golf.
What?
There you go. That was their sort of artist's impression, wasn't it? An artist's impression of the new Golf.
That's an artist's guess, isn't it?
It's very much so. Yeah, it's where they used to do that a lot, didn't they? I think Auto Express still do that quite a bit. But
yeah, they just use Photoshop.
About a Citroen 2CV that was turbocharged. And
Steve Cropley's, yes.
gentleman in question is Steve Cropley, who at the
with
time,
the black armband on the wheel arch.
That's it, yeah. So he was the editor of Car Magazine at the time, and he bought this 2CV. It was an Express car, and he also went to Paris in this particular issue to watch the last batch of 2CVs coming out of the factory. So it's a very heavy edition. Now, I'm at this point a little kid reading this magazine, absolutely enthralled by this Turbo 2CV story, which the car then caught fire, overheated.
Yes, because I remember this because the heat exchanger pipes were cardboard.
That's it, yeah. Well, there's we've got a picture of it on fire. I think we actually have got a picture of it on fire. There it is. Look, that's the 2CV in question on fire.
We managed to get a picture back before. We should appreciate that, because that's before the days of smartphones. That is commitment, isn't it? Getting out a point and shoot and looking at your car. I'm not going to put it out. Hang on.
Well, I just love the story about the 2CV factory as well. So at that point, I absolutely fell in love with 2CVs, and the bloke behind it was Steve Cropley. Anyway, scroll forward to last year. We sort of had a chat over the years, but he tweeted me and asked me if I wanted to buy his Berlingo. He says, "Oh, I think you like Berlingos. Do you want to buy mine? I'm going to get something else, for the family." He says, "Do you want to buy mine? I've had it 19 years, and I bought it from Citroen UK because it was used." By then, Steve was working for Autocar magazine as editor of Autocar magazine, and it was featured in Autocar over that period. He took his kids to school in it. He took them to university in it. Lived a life with this Berlingo. Having bought it off Citroen UK, and I've actually got here a letter from Citroen UK. And this is 2002. Please do not remove from the car green card for Citroen Berlingo. To whom it may concern, this is to confirm that the above mentioned vehicle is on loan to Steve Cropley from the 17th of November 2003 to the 17th of November 2004. He has the authorization of Citroen UK to drive the vehicle for business and pleasure in the United Kingdom. That is from Citroen UK. That is the original letter, the handover letter, when the car was a long-term test car with Autocar. Anyway, as I said, a year later, he buys it, and then I buy it off him. I wasn't able to buy the Turbo 2CV off him, so I thought, well, bugger it.
Has he still got it?
Well, that 2CV is still with us. It's still alive. It lives in a yard in Shropshire. And unfortunately, I think it was turbocharged again, and I think it was afterwards supercharged sometime in the 90s. But unfortunately, it was left to deteriorate, and it's unfortunately there's not much left of it now. It does still exist though, and I've been trying to buy that car for about 20 years, and
that would be the circle complete, wouldn't it?
Yeah, he won't sell it. He just won't sell it. This guy, and it sits there just rotting and rotting. And to be honest, if I bought it now, it would be a reshell. It wouldn't be the same car really.
We'd have to turbocharge yours.
I have thought about it actually, but
it's the right colour.
It is exactly. Well, that's why I've got my car. So I bought my red 2CV because I've always wanted a red 2CV. I wanted that red 2CV, but ended up with the one that I've got now, which is a car that I've actually also known for 30 years. Because I've known the people who owned it for 30 years, and I remember that car as their family car. So it's probably just as important, really, as a car. It's a real honour to own that car, actually, even though it died last year, but it's now been rebuilt and looking rather shiny.
Yeah, I mean that's just it had sad times at the Channel Tunnel, didn't it?
Yeah. It got rear-ended by those lovely SUVs we were talking about earlier. It was
lovely
sandwich, and very nearly lost it, unfortunately. But yeah, that goes to show it was a whole different experience. But when your classic car gets smashed from at the hands of somebody else, and somebody comes up to you after the crash and goes, "Look at the state of my VW Touareg or whatever it was. I've only had it 3 weeks, and it's all right for you. You've only got an old car.
You've only had it 3 weeks, and you crashed it already."
I said, "Look, 37 years of memories, pal. Your car common as muck." I was every time I got angry after the accident, I had blood pouring down my forehead and all down my shirt, and I was kind of limping and not in the best of ways after that accident. But this guy then telling me that my car didn't matter because it was just an old car, and that's unfortunately, as you know, how people are when it comes
That
to
is how people are.
old cars.
Unfortunately, not everybody, but the majority.
Mm.
That is how they are. It's
It
and you get treated like that on the road. Well, I don't know. I'm finding recently, like if I'm out in the BX, you start to get let out more at junctions. Like it stopped being an old banger, and it's starting to be like, oh wow, look at that. So
I think we're at the point with the BX where that is a car that people remember owning and remember fondly, isn't it? I think we're there.
if you drive the Picasso, then you're just an obstacle.
Definitely, yes, especially that Picasso. I should imagine the past the Picasso, but see where that goes.
They've got 87 horsepower.
I think.
Oh, was it 87?
Yeah, it was. It was quite surprising, actually. I mean, I was thinking of I was thinking of a little present for that car and perhaps giving it a remap, but maybe not.
Well, you can make sure you've got the right file.
Yes, that's right. Oh, yes.
That did not go well.
So, are you? What your plans for the rest of the year? You got any adventures coming up? Are you doing any little road trips? Are you going anywhere?
Not really. I want to go. It all hinges around getting cars back on the road. So next year I've had which hasn't been on the channel or may well not be on the channel because it might just be something I keep for me. But I've had my BX16 valve for 20 years next year.
Right.
So I should probably get that back out because that's been off the road since 2017. Because it was starting to go a little bit frilly. And it fades so fast as well. It's ridiculous. Like you polish it and you'll have it on the road a month and it's pink.
Have you been to the Conservatoire in Paris yet?
Yeah, I went with you.
Did
Well,
you?
I didn't go with you, but we were in the well, not in the convoy, but in the group that went.
When was this?
Because you were talking to the French guy who works there, who was like still didn't like Citroen at the time of closing it.
Oh my goodness!
Didn't he buy a CX? And he watched it being built. He walked through with it.
That's Pierre Blonde. Yeah, he
How
was
cool was that?
amazing. Yeah, he was on the line in the late, I think it was 79 when his car was being built. He ordered his car and he was able to follow it along the line at the production at Aulnay-sous-Bois in Paris, to the actual factory. He was able to observe it from beginning
and when
to
it come the hand built bit, some guy's doing that, and he's like, tighter, come on.
And he's still got the car, still got it, you know, and that's a family heirloom if ever I've heard of one. But
He was pissed at Citroen. It's like, well, they're all building them in China now. He's like, he wasn't happy that they shut that factory.
Isn't it just great though when you meet people who've got stories like that about where they were.
Yeah.
We were I was talking to a chap about the American spec Rover SD1. He was on the line building those to be sent off to America. And earlier this year, I went with some friends. We bought an SD1 in California and we drove it to Boston, across America. And this terrible, we didn't think we'd get out of it. In fact, we didn't get out of LA. We broke down after 26 miles just outside Los Angeles.
And an SD1?
Yeah, it's a $1,000 SD1 that we bought in California. But it was the US spec, so it had the great big US bumpers. 1969.
Didn't they have quad lights?
Yeah, quad lights.
Yeah.
Great big bumpers, and yeah, it was horrible. It was really horrible. It was how to ruin an SD1. You know, it really was falling apart. But of course, Californian car, so it was rust free. But I met a guy who'd been building them in Solihull because they were built in the first portion of SD1 production at Solihull. And he was saying, yeah, he says, I thought they were terrible. He says, we sent them off. They were awful. We thought, well, it's only the Yanks, isn't it? They'll be really disappointed when they get these. Well, they were really disappointed when these blasted things turned up in America. And in fact, a couple of years before, a few of us had been involved in this recovery of a Rover 800, which over there was called a Sterling. but we were so Jim McGill and a few others and friends in America, and we picked this thing up and we mucked about in New York with this Sterling, but not before we went to a car show in Pennsylvania, where this guy came up to us who used to sell them new. This American chap who used to sell them new in Texas. And I thought, well,
I can't imagine a British car being sold in Texas.
He was kind of like, no, he says, when these cars were new, he said they were, and he had the hat and the piercing eyes, and you're like, when these cars were new, he says, we thought it was great because the British prestige coupled with Japanese build. I mean, this was, he was selling Audis and Porsches at the time, and he said that this was going to change the game, selling these British Japanese cars. He says, we sold a lot of these cars, and then they started coming back.
Return of the Sterling.
Honestly, you do things like turn the stereo on and the sunroof would open. It was just absolutely nuts. All over the shop. And his parting shot to us when he walked away was he without looking back, he said, only the British could screw up a Japanese car. But this is the thing.
I mean, I've heard some cracking story. I didn't hear the story. I got told a mate of mine lives up near Glasgow, and he said he remembers when people, and not necessarily remembers people working, but remembers not long after people working at the at Linwood at the Imp factory, and he said they all used to get cars and staff discount. Like, you know, they'd all have one, but they always used to buy a basic one, like the cheapest one you could get. And then the weird thing was, is over time, they slowly started having more and more bits on them, like better seats, door cards, wing mirrors, wheel trims, and everything like that. Slowly, these cars started to become top spec cars. And he's like, how are we doing that? 5-figure discount.
Always thought there's an idea for a book in this, you know, stories from tales from the factory floor. I went to the Nissan factory in Sunderland a few years ago with my Nissan. I had a Nissan Bluebird, a British-built Nissan Bluebird, one of the earlier ones. I bought it for 150 quid in 2015 or something, but needed a bit of work, put it back on the road and drove it to Sunderland to celebrate 30 years of car building in Sunderland for Practical Classics. So I did a feature on it in the mag and everything. And met some of the guys who were there, would have been there that very week building cars. So, you know, they got to see the car. I opened the door. I says, you know, who put the doors together? The rear electric windows have stopped working, you know. And it's all, he said. And he went straight to the driver's door and pushed a button, which basically meant the rear windows would open and shut because it was the child lock thing for the rear windows, you know, that I'd missed. I thought they were faulty, so clearly not.
Yeah, it's not. Nissan Bluebird wouldn't be faulty.
Not at all. Not one part of that car was faulty. Everything worked on it. It was brilliant. But those guys were saying that, you know, when that factory arrived in Sunderland, it changed lives. Suddenly, the ethos that came with working at those factories, at that particular factory, changed the way they thought about the way they managed their finances. And soon they could sort of consider going on holiday and doing all this other stuff and doing up the garden and all this other business. And it wasn't about the pay that they were getting. It's about how they were organising themselves as a result of how organised they were at work. So that was really fascinating. But then, they went on a factory tour at Longbridge. They did a sort of, it was a government thing where they did an exchange, and they had some visitors from Longbridge come up to inspect the factory, and then some workers from Nissan went down to Longbridge for a tour. And he says, he says, we couldn't believe it when we got there. He says, they were building the cars they were building. There was some bloke sitting in the driver's seat with his feet out the passenger window, eating a sandwich on the line. The car was on down the production line. Someone's eating a sandwich inside. And he says, everywhere they went in the factory, their feet were crunching under their, on the floor because there was debris and stuff all over the factory floor. And they said they didn't permit that at Nissan Sunderland. You know, they vigorously swept everything up, every bit of debris there. There's definitely a book in it, I think. Tales from the Factory.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is. Yeah, but well, wait, we've hit the time. You've done your shift.
Well, you know, I feel bad about leaving you. I feel like, you know, I have people to speak to, but you know, I feel like I don't want to abandon you, so I'll stay up for a bit longer. And
well, we've got Katie on next.
Yeah.
Who's? I mean, I'm amazed she's talking to me actually, because like she's a show winner now.
She is,
and I'm not. I mean, I've won. Yeah, okay, best in show with the BX, but that's I you know.
No.
I don't know if it's going to be her or one of her representatives I'm going to talk to.
Yes, you might be talking to one of her people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've not had the request through yet. I've got to send up a bowl of M&Ms, but only blue.
Well, listen, it's been absolutely lovely to speak to you, and I hope I've not been babbling too much. And
no, at all, mate. No, I enjoy it. I didn't actually. I was going to ask more about the classic car scene and what goes on, you know, in the background and that. But I'll have to wait for another time.
It's all mad. It's all a bunch of lunatics and mad people like us, and you know what it's like. I think to sum it all up, I think the nicest thing about it all is that younger classics are now being more welcomed into that community. I think, isn't that great? You know, that finally we've got through to the old farts and said, right, if you're 20-something and you love a Ford Focus, bring it on. You know, everyone is welcome, and that's the whole thing about the classic.
At the end of the day, like a Morris Minor was 20 years old once, and I bet that was regarded as a classic at the time.
Absolutely. So, you know, it's the world is changing, and we're right there, and doesn't it feel great?
Young timers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, mate. Thanks for that.
Keep donating, everybody, and thanks so much, Richard. Look after yourself, and I'll be watching.
Nice one. All right, mate. Well, we'll be back in a minute with Katie.
Good night.
Cheers.